And welcome into a little bit of Saturday breaking news. Obviously, we did not anticipate this being done. BA on his way to a baseball game, myself out for a nice little 6 mile run when I get the notification that Georgia has landed a quarterback. And BA, you spent a good part of your show on Friday talking about the quarterback
Yeah.
position. But I don't think this is the name that we expected. Jared Curtis, a 2026 quarterback, top ranked court player at the position by, I believe, 247 and on three at this point in the recruiting process. Not yet a 5-star, but a type of player that is tracking to be one. And, this is a name Georgia fans that at least follow recruiting know. And I'll ask you, BA, and hopefully we can get Jeff Sintel to pop in here with us shortly. What do you make of this news?
Well, we mentioned Jared Curtis in the show on Friday, but certainly not, hey, watch out for a commitment this weekend. We weren't saying that at all. And I think that's probably the first time we've probably mentioned Curtis on the show. At least I think that it is, just around the idea that he visited, Georgia, kind of had plans to visit Georgia here this week. So what I think about this is twofold, and I'll start with the first part of this. I think that everybody is going to want to jump into this somehow being a referendum on Julian Juju Lewis in some form or fashion. I understand why that is. I don't believe you can talk about Curtis's commitment without at least mentioning what this might mean for Lewis, because that's just more of a top of mind player. And we're only a few weeks away, a couple of months at the most, away from him, making his decision. But if you make the entirety of the Curtis discussion about what this means for Lewis, what this means for Matt Zollers, I think you're making a mistake, because as you said, not only is the number one quarterback, 24/7 Sports, now we're early days, the class of 2026, these ratings are going to change a good bit. 24/7 Sports has him ranked as the number one player overall in the class of 2026 right now. So Curtis is a big deal, whether Julian Lewis exists or whether anybody exists. He is a very big deal. Now, there's another part of Georgia fans who are going to say, a few weeks ago, Georgia had a commitment from a quarterback who was supposed to be transferring the next day, and then he still changed his mind. So if Jaden Maeva can change his mind over the course of a few minutes, then who knows what Jared Curtis will do over the course of the next 2 years. And I totally get all of that. But the point here is that Curtis is a good enough player that it's at least a big deal that he committed. And it's a big deal for reasons that go beyond just what this means for the more immediate future of a couple of quarterbacks who are going to maybe be making their choices there in the class of 2025.
Yeah, and I think the big thing overall is that this does give Georgia some stability at the quarterback position moving forward. Now, yes, you can fairly point out that Dylan Raiola was a one-time quarterback commit, and he ultimately flips at the last minute there. But Jared Curtis out of Nashville, strong bill, plays for Nashville Christian Academy, or Nashville Christian School, excuse me. They have produced a ton of players out of that area. Andre Evans, a Georgia signee in this most recent class. And you look at the quarterbacks that Georgia has had on their roster in recent years and the guys they've gone after. Carson Becker is their current starting quarterback, 6'4", 220 pounds. Ryan Puglisi, 6'2", 6'3" range right there. Jared Curtis, as a high school junior, is 6'3", 215. Another name that, is worth following, though, I think this does have a pretty big impact on him. Matt Zollers, the 2025 quarterback, who is set to announce his decision on April 4th.
Yeah.
He's in that 6'4" or 6'3", 215-pound range. So with Mike Bobo back as the offensive coordinator at Georgia, I think we now have a better understanding of what he's really looking for in a quarterback in terms of size, intangibles, build, things along the lines of that. And Jared Curtis fits that to a T. Now, he's got a long way to go in his development process. Again, he's only played through his sophomore season of high school football. But this is a big addition for Georgia, and I know it's going to be natural to wonder what this means for the 2025 quarterback recruiting class, as you touched on there, BA, with Juju Lewis being such a prominent name. I believe he's visiting Colorado this weekend. Mm-hmm. Alabama, Auburn are names to monitor there as well for Lewis. And the fact that Georgia doesn't have a quarterback for that 2025 cycle, we all assume Carson Beck is gone after this year. He does technically have another year of eligibility, but I would be floored if that ends up being used. So you're looking at Gunnar Stockton, you're looking at Ryan Puglisi, you're almost certainly looking at a transfer quarterback for this 2023 window. I do think one name to keep in mind would be Ryan Montgomery, a four-star quarterback out of Ohio. Florida, South Carolina have been pushing for his commitment there. But I think maybe now, and this is, again, pure speculation, with Jared Curtis committing to this Georgia class, I wonder if he becomes a more prominent name, and you wonder if maybe Juju Lewis starts maybe trending more elsewhere. I think Zollers, that ship may have already been sailing there, especially because it seemed like Georgia was committed to Lewis. But it's worth pointing out, Juju Lewis was just at practice, I believe, either last week or 2 weeks ago. one of the practice viewing windows that we had there. I expect Georgia to continue to try and recruit Juju Lewis moving forward. But at the same point in time, I do think that this move does have at least some sort of impact on the Lewis commitment. And it's worth noting as well, at one point in time, Juju Lewis himself was a 2026 quarterback.
That's right. That's exactly right. To me, Kirby Smart's always very well aware of timing and how timing can sort of contribute to symbolism when it comes to recruiting. We talk about getting some good news after having some bad news. So if we believe that Kirby Smart considers timing with recruiting announcements and things like that, then the timing of this, we're led to believe, must mean something, because there's certainly no hurry for Jared Curtis, to make a commitment. He's very early on in his process here. So if you want to read something into that, I don't believe you'd be completely wrong to. Now, if you read so much into it that it's all about 2025 and you disregard Curtis as a player, then I think you've taken it too far. But if somebody says, okay, well, to take this announcement a few days ahead of Zollers, maybe a couple of months ahead of Julian Lewis, I take that seriously. There must be something here to this. Every negotiation is ultimately won by the side that wants the outcome the least. And based on what Julian Juju Lewis's father told DawgNation this week, they're going to be trying to drive a pretty hard bargain in their ultimate decision about where they go and play. They have some clear expectations for what they want. And I'm sure there are a lot of programs that would be desperate enough to give them whatever they want, because Julian Lewis is obviously a top flight, quarterback competition, or I should say top flight quarterback prospect. But Georgia's just not really in the business of just acquiescing to anybody's needs and their, greatest wishes. That's just not what they do. That Georgia's going to remain in a position of strength. And so I agree with you. I think that Georgia's pursuit of Julian Juju Lewis will continue, but it's going to continue, I think, from a position of strength, which is if Lewis ultimately decides that there's a better fit for him or another program that's willing to give him more, whatever more, is, than what Georgia's perhaps willing to do, well, Georgia can rest and say, that's okay. We've already got the top quarterback of the class of 2026 committed for however long that remains true. We've got the class of top 2026's top quarterback committed there as well. It just allows Georgia, I believe, to maintain a position of strength in this sort of ongoing discussion with Julian Lewis and about Julian Lewis and ultimately where he's going to play his college ball.
Yeah, and I get quarterback is a little bit of a different position because only one guy can play that spot. But, this is the ethos of the Georgia football program. Competition matters. And I think, again, you hit the nail on the head there. It's either, hey, Julian, we still want you. I imagine Kirby Smart, one of his first phone calls or first text messages, whatever, I'm assuming they're out of practice right now, is to Juju Lewis after this news. It may have even gone before it had happened. I think with Lewis, again, Georgia breeds competition. It's why they've been as successful as they are. This idea that they were just going to kowtow to the Lewis demands and let him walk in and be this player, that's just not who the Georgia program has been. And so I think because of that, as you point out there, BA, this allows Georgia to operate from a position of strength. You hear Kirby Smart talk so much about fit, culture. You hear him talk a lot about development and the importance of that in recruiting. I think this commitment from Jared Curtis sort of reflects that. This is a guy that they just feel fits what the program is looking for. High IQ, good recruiting background there. They target those types of guys. And to get this guy in so early, I think it's a big win for Georgia. Obviously, this was going to be a national recruitment. And so to go in, get Curtis early, and I think that further solidifies this quarterback room for the long-term future. But at the same point in time, I think this only now puts perhaps a further microscope on the Julian Lewis or the Juju Lewis recruitment because of the fact that, look, I think Georgia's still going to want to take him. They're still going to make the same pitch. The pitch does not change from yesterday to today when it comes to Lewis. Now, he might look more seriously at a place like an Auburn or a place like Colorado moving forward. But I believe at the end of the day, Georgia still very much wants Julian Lewis. And if Julian Lewis decides that this is the best place for him, close to home, a lot of talented players here, he knows he's going to be able to win and compete. It's going to really be up to, in my mind, Julian Lewis now to make that decision.
Yeah, I also wonder, I know Georgia got the commitment from Steven Shivers yesterday, the large human run-stopping machine out of Tennessee. But it's been pretty quiet on the Georgia recruiting front for a while. Haven't had a commitment since October. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis is the only 2026 commit for Georgia, right?
Yep.
How much of this, if we talk about the timing, what the timing means, and the fact that people weren't really on guard for this today and now it's happened, how much of this is maybe Georgia behind the scenes saying, hey, maybe we need to rattle a few pots and pans in recruiting? We haven't really made much noise on that front. Now, nobody thinks there's anything wrong with Georgia recruiting, and We expect the 2025, the 2026 classes to look very much like previous classes have looked. But, it's just been kind of quiet as of late. How much of this is Georgia being like, hey, we just need to remind people we're here?
Yeah, before the commitment yesterday, I've been talking with a buddy. You know who he wasn't even in the 2025 class. The last actual commitment ad player that Georgia made to a recruiting class was KJ Bolden back on signing day in December. And so, in that sense, it has been very quiet. And look, we know moving forward that recruiting that month of June and July now, even regardless of what ends up happening, if they add an extra signing day in there, those 8 weeks, I think, are the most important time in the recruiting calendar. So, in one sense, it's much ado about nothing. But I do think it reestablishes this idea that moving forward, hey, like Georgia can get anyone at any time in any place. That's how well they recruit.
So I want to, if you don't mind me, I want to ask you a question that you brought up a little earlier. So you seem to suggest, if I heard you correctly, you think now Matt Zollers may go elsewhere because of this. Have I heard you say that?
I had already sort of been leaning that he might be looking elsewhere. Again, I think Penn State and Pitt maybe seem like the front runners there. And it seems like, and this is just my, reading it, informed speculation, so to speak. It seems like Zollers wants to be done with his recruitment and get this over with. That's sort of always been the sense that I've gotten from him. And obviously reading and Jeff's reporting there, following along with that. And I just don't know that he's going to be wanting to wait around for Georgia to decide what they want to do with Juju Lewis. And I think, shades of maybe the Zach Evans recruitment in the 2020 recruiting cycle, where Georgia was content to go the distance for a player like Zach Evans. I think Juju Lewis is maybe they view him in a similar manner in terms of the talent, not saying his career is going to turn out the same way at all, much less the recruitment there as well. And so because of that, they maybe say, hey, like, we know we can get this guy if we prioritize him, but we just happen to think this guy is better. And look, when you're at Georgia and the rate and the margins for a championship are this thin, I think that's kind of how you have to recruit sometimes. It's unfortunate because I think if Georgia really wanted to prioritize Zoller, and maybe they perhaps have, again, Georgia's going to get the last visit there when he visits on April 2nd. I just think that Zollers wants to get this done. He's not going to wait around. He believes that he can go and play and be a star anywhere. And I think Georgia seems content to wait on Juju Lewis and make Juju Lewis their first choice and first option in this class.
Well, maybe this is a dumb question, and maybe the answer is because he just has somewhere else he'd like to go. But my question would be, why does Zollers have to be any different than Ryan Puglisi was a year ago? Because aren't they rated somewhat similar as a prospect? Puglisi was an Elite 11 quarterback a year ago, and Puglisi was more than happy to come to Georgia with Dylan Raiola also coming as well. Georgia wanted 2 quarterbacks. Ultimately, it actually didn't get those a year ago because Raiola left. Now, maybe Zollers just a different guy, has a little bit of a different mindset. But certainly the recruiting ranking for Zollers would not suggest that he couldn't be like Puglisi was a year ago, a part of a 2-quarterback class. And by the way, much like Puglisi, showing up at Georgia with his own list of admirers already, and no shortage of people on the internet saying, hey, the real quarterback find is so-and-so. Puglisi had that a year ago. Zollers may have that for this upcoming year. If Ryan was willing to be a 2-quarterback guy a year ago, then is it impossible to believe that Matt might be willing to do that here this year?
No, it's not. I think Ryan Puglisi, in terms of quarterbacks, in terms of quarterback recruiting, is going to be a little bit of an outlier. And that's not to say that Zollers can't do the same thing and follow in that same path. I just don't believe, I just have a hard time believing it until I see it. And so, again, we'll see how this all develops and unfolds. In a few weeks, we'll probably have some clarity on this in terms of where things actually are with Zollers. And, April 4th, we'll very likely have our decision there in terms of what Georgia is doing moving forward. And again, I think the world of Zollers. I came on your show, I think this last week, and said I would take Zollers over Juju Lewis. I just think Georgia has made it clear they're in the Juju Lewis business. He has visited a ton. I don't think and they all know this is a very public recruitment, and there's a lot of eyeballs drawn to this. I think they know that, this is the dance that they're going to have to make to get there. And
Can I ask you another question? What do you put the percentage chance that Jared Curtis plays at Georgia?
You mean, so I'll say starts a game at Georgia?
I'll just say, you can say starts a game if you want to, but to me, well, you answer the question first.
I'll say like under 25%.
Oh, wow, you're a lot lower than I was going to say 50-50.
Yeah, and Curtis is a wildly talented player, but I mean, there were times during Carson Beck's time at Georgia, like, I don't know, you asked at the start of the 2022 season when Stetson had come back and played really well after the Oregon game, what would have been the odds that Carson Beck starts a game at Georgia? It would have been pretty slim. or at least publicly, people would have said that to be pretty slim. And so I think that these things can go, especially at the quarterback position, so many different ways, and it's so far out. I think that factors into the lowness there. But obviously, this is a guy Georgia absolutely believes in and can help this team and will certainly help this 2026 recruiting class.
Let me make a clunky analogy for a moment. I used to be a big NBA fan, but around the time I started losing some of my NBA fandom was around the time that when a trade would happen, I had to have the trade explained to me. Like, what does this trade mean? What's this about? Well, so-and-so's got an expiring contract, and so-and-so's this. There was a lot of like complicated backstory involved in personnel moves that made the league, I think, hard to follow. My point is, and this is where the analogy kind of gets a little clunky, I do think there's a certain explanation required for the Jared Curtis news here. It's obviously a big deal anytime Georgia gets a quarterback commit, especially for such a highly rated recruit. But why now on a prospect that's a couple of years away joining Georgia? That's what I think for people who are tuned in right now, for people who are talking about this among themselves as they're at their own baseball games and things like that today. By the way, Georgia walked it off against Alabama just a few minutes ago, by the way. And Kirby Smart's got the Go Dogs out, as we see on the screen. But the point is, as Georgia fans are maybe sitting around at Foley Field waiting for game 2 or whatever it is they're doing, getting ready to invade Winston-Salem tomorrow for the big game there in the NIT, whatever's going on, I do think there is some curiosity around, okay, what does this mean? And therefore, I don't think you can talk about Curtis in 2026 without doing, as we've been doing here for the last few minutes, which is discussing the implications for 2025.
Right. And because there was already, I think, so much drama, intrigue around what Georgia was going to do in 2025, I think this only adds to it. And, I've seen some comments asking, oh, well, Georgia can take a guy in the transfer portal. Whether Curtis had committed or not, I think Georgia was going to be active in the transfer portal looking for a guy, looking for a 4 scholarship quarterback. We already knew they were trying to do that with Jaden Maeva. I think they're going to try and get to 4 scholarship quarterbacks. And so I think the plan would be if you can get a guy going forward that has multiple years of eligibility, if you can get him in this year, sort of help him along the way, knowing he's not going to have to start and play right away this year. I think that absolutely matters into it. Before you go, because you got a baseball game to go that is far more important than this. I have a quarterback room to pitch you moving forward.
Okay.
And because we just talked about transfer quarterbacks and guys, and I've got a story coming tomorrow. What about Whit Muschamp as a transfer portal quarterback? Now, he's obviously signed to play to Vanderbilt, hasn't played a game there yet. But I think with Georgia having a need at quarterback, Georgia obviously knows what Whit Muschamp is as a quarterback. I think Muschamp obviously went to Vanderbilt because he believes he can play, especially at an SEC level. I wonder what the scouting report is on him, because obviously they have it better than anyone with Will being there. And with the fact that Will Muschamp moving into an analyst role with the intent on being present at Witt's games and going to those more moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in seeing sort of what his development looks like going forward.
Yeah, because he played at Baylor in Chattanooga. It's really interesting. I mean, I love off the kind of, sort of off the radar points like that. I think that's a really clever idea. He played at Baylor in Chattanooga, very prolific offense. So he's thrown the ball a lot. And a little bit like A.J. Swan or some of these other guys that have been to Vanderbilt, you go there with the potential of playing early and you learn a lot from that experience. It may not go well, but you learn a lot from that experience. I could certainly see I would have never considered that, but I think that's an interesting option. I would also add to this, to the Georgia fans who say, oh, I don't care about 2026 quarterback or really any kind of high school recruit. I'll just go ahead and get the transfer portal. I know that conventional wisdom exists, but y'all, we have to look at standing precedent in all of this. Yes, Caleb Williams left Oklahoma, went to USC, won the Heisman Trophy, but that's like the rare exception here, especially in our league. It's Graham Mertz at Florida. It's what Tyler Horn is his name, for the former Michigan State quarterback at Auburn. Peyton Thorne at Auburn. It's the lacrosse player who goes to Alabama from Notre Dame and ends up, basically leaving the sport. Tyler Buckner. The idea that you're going to go out and get better at the quarterback spot in the transfer portal, there honestly aren't a lot of examples of that. Even Georgia's high-profile situation that was supposed to be true, the former 5-star JT Daniels, through a series of all kinds of unforeseen circumstances, that didn't even happen here either. But the transfer portal is a real thing. Obviously, there are tons of quarterbacks in it. More than half the quarterbacks in any given year are going to be former transfers. But the number of teams who make themselves dramatically better at the position because of a transfer, that list over the course of the last couple of years is actually a lot smaller and shorter than you think it is.
And you look at that list, be careful, because once you get on a transfer quarterback, it can be very hard to get off that cycle of hunting a transfer quarterback every year. Notre Dame is rolling.
It's the Ozempic of recruiting tactics.
You
Once
only
you
get
start,
that.
you can never stop.
You only get that with BA. You own there's no person out there that can make an Ozempic transfer portal quarterback commitment like BA there. So BA, we'll let you go here. Georgia lands Jared Curtis. Sort of final thoughts there. Anything that you want to say on Curtis? Obviously, 2025 matters a lot.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're gonna have a ton on this on your show on Monday. But Georgia lands 5-star quarterback, number 1 overall player in the 2026 class, Jared Curtis.
This is a very good player. His arrival at Georgia is a very long time away. And all of this just adds to the fact that quarterback recruiting for the foreseeable future is going to be very, very interesting. And for those of us who are entertained by recruiting drama, there's going to be a ton of it at this position, and I can't wait to absorb it all and read what you write and enjoy talking about it on DawgNation Daily and just living in this world, because it's about to be really, really compelling here for the foreseeable future, I believe.
Yep, BA absolutely nails it on the head. We'll let you go there. Thanks a lot for helping us out, BA. We'll keep
all right, see you guys. Enjoy the week.
Yep. So talking BA there, we're going to keep this going for maybe about another 10 minutes unless Jeff Santel is able to actually jump on and join us. He now has the story up on DawgNation.com. Georgia lands commitment from 2026 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis. We're going to take a few comments and questions here as a way to sort of, kill the time. And hopefully Jeff is able to land a commitment there. And again, touched on it earlier. I think the size here, 6'3", 215 pounds, as Stick D's brings up on YouTube. 247 has him listed at 6'4". I wouldn't be surprised if he's not done growing yet because he is just that young. He has that big plus size frame that I know I certainly covet when you're looking at quarterbacks and guys that can play moving forward there as well. And that's part of the reason why I sort of value Zollers maybe a little bit more than Juju Lewis, just because of the size with Juju there and what it means moving forward. But also, I mean, like Bryce Young won a Heisman Trophy and was the best player in college football, and he's under 6 feet. Stetson Bennett won 2 national championships at 6 feet. So it is not an end-all, be-all there. But I think very clearly now with the commitment of Jared Curtis, you know what you have moving forward in that quarterback position. And as BA pointed out there, look, we're a long ways away from Jared Curtis, even if he ever ends up stepping foot on campus. I think there's, potentially a world where he steps on foot as an opponent one day for Georgia. That's just sort of the reality of recruiting the quarterback position. I will point out, and, feel a little dubious in doing so, every 5-star quarterback that Kirby Smart has signed via either the transfer portal or out of high school has ended up transferring out of the program. Jacob Eason in 2016, Justin Fields in 2018, JT Daniels out of the transfer portal in the 2021 prior to the 2020 season, and then Brock Vandegrift in the 2021 class. All those guys end up transferring elsewhere. Now, Jake Fromm was a maybe fringe 5-star. Off the top of my head, he may have been a 5-star by one of the recruiting services, so you can certainly point that out there as well. But having said all that, look, Georgia still finds a way to win. And I think spinning this back to 2025 and what it means there moving forward, look, I think this pretty clearly puts the ball in Juju Lewis's court. Like, how badly do you want to potentially come to Georgia knowing that you've got a guy like Jared Curtis behind you? Kirby Smart, his comments at Georgia's Pro Day recently about the importance of development over NIL, I think spoke really loudly for a quarterback recruiting process. And Lewis, that has been tied to a lot of NIL earnings. There's been a lot of money and, noise made, Freudian slip there, when it comes to the recruiting process in that regard there. So I'll be interested in seeing where it goes there. I will note as well the Stefan Shivers commitment that Georgia landed yesterday. I know he was only rated as a 3-star. I have a feeling his recruiting ranking is going to really jump up. You look at some of the teams that were in on him. LSU made a really hard late push to get him. Oregon, I believe, was a team mentioned there. Auburn as well. I know this guy's listed as a 3-star prospect, not the highest player in the world. Go check out Jeff Santel's Twitter account where he's got a clip of Shivers just bowling over somebody at his size. So a very rare and unique athlete that Georgia goes and gets there. So I think moving forward, it'll be very, very interesting in seeing what this ultimately means for Georgia for the 2025 recruiting class. But as Tim Mars points out, it might not. Georgia may still very well be like, okay, cool. We are making a decision of who we want at the quarterback position. The 3 names to know, as we sort of touched on earlier. Juju Lewis, obviously the biggest one out of Carrollton, Georgia, 5-star quarterback, former 2026 recruiting prospect himself. Obviously, a big name to know there. Matt Zollers announced last night that he will be making his decision on April 4th. He is taking a visit to Georgia on April 2nd. Georgia will get the last crack there. There's a world where 2 weeks from now, we know what Georgia is doing in the 2025 and 2026 quarterback recruiting cycle. If indeed Zollers commits to Georgia, and then you have Curtis in there as well, and you sort of have that quarterback plan moving forward. So for all the questions of what the future of the Georgia quarterback position looks like moving forward, it could all be answered relatively quickly here. And then obviously Ryan Montgomery, a name to know there as well. I believe he is taking an official visit to Georgia in June. I believe the weekend of June 21st. I think that's a name that becomes much more important to know now moving forward when you do have a guy like Jared Curtis in the recruiting class already. So let's see. Any more questions? Yeah, Green Soldier. Good to have you on, Green Soldier. I know you can be sporadic from time to time in terms of your availability. 6'4", 350 pounds. And obviously, he's going to probably lose some weight when he gets to Georgia. Just because, when he gets in a big time strength and conditioning program, that's what always sort of tends to happen. So, but to have those measurements at that age, and again, I know a lot of people might look at the recruiting ranking and be maybe perhaps not so much impressed there. I would say go ahead and look at the teams that were pushing for his commitment, and that'll tell you a lot more about how I think college football views him than maybe some of the recruiting industry does there. Let's see. Tristan West, good to see you. Yeah, we touched on this during the show with BA when he was able to hop on with us. Prior to landing Shivers yesterday, the last time Georgia landed a commitment was KJ Bolden. Last time they had landed a 2025 commitment was Bo Walker, the running back out of Cedar Grove in the Atlanta area. And look, we touched on this before. Recruiting now in the current calendar, the month of June, the month of July, early August, those are the most important times during this recruiting calendar. And so I can understand why you'd want to see commitments, especially after the spring visit window. I think when you get to April and you get coaches back out on the road, assistants are able to go visit players and talk with them on their high school campuses. I think that's going to be even more illuminating in terms of who Georgia goes after and who Georgia is visiting. Follow those assistant recruiting or assistant coach visits. That'll tell you a lot about who Georgia is really looking after. And then just the official visit list. And so, that first weekend, Juju Lewis, May 31st, has an official visit scheduled to Georgia. And so, if Georgia's willing to wait that long and take that process out, that becomes a vitally important day on the recruiting calendar just because of bringing him in. Yeah, Crow King and J Rowe on YouTube both bring up Diamond Dogs walking it off against Alabama. Big win for them after getting swept by Kentucky a week ago. Nice start for Wes Johnson at home in SEC play. You have to win your home games if you're going to make an NCAA tournament. Charlie Condon, I saw, hit another home run. Enjoy him while you can, because I have a feeling he's going to be potentially the number one overall pick in this year's MLB draft. And with Brock Bowers moving on to the NFL, I don't believe right now there's a better athlete at the University of Georgia than Condon. 15 home runs already on the season, and we're in our second weekend of SEC play. This guy is a truly special player. So make sure to appreciate him. Check out our buddy Jack Leo, who's done an awesome job covering the Diamond Dogs this season for their first under Wes Johnson there. So let's see. Darian Davis, look, this is a fair, I think, question to bring up. How likely do we think this commitment will last, being it's so early with how recruiting goes during these times? It's a fair point to bring up. Look, I think if you're a Georgia fan and you remember the Dylan Raiola, fiasco, so to speak, committed to Georgia in May, the week before he's set to enroll at Georgia, ends up, cooling off that, taking a visit to Nebraska, signs there. I think you're certainly in your right to be dubious there of, is this guy ultimately going to, stay committed to Georgia? I think this maybe works in the opposite, though, because he's a quarterback and because he's made his decision so far out. I do think that maybe this is something that he just wants to get over with, get in the boat, and sort of be a leader for this class, because you so often see the quarterback position is a leader for a recruiting class. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people want Juju Lewis, because of the perception that he's going to bring even more guys in the state of Georgia to the University of Georgia. So landing a guy like Curtis, I think, allows him to be the Pied Piper for the 2026 recruiting class there. So Georgia lands its first commitment of the 2026 recruiting cycle. It's a great one to land. Jared Curtis, the number one player per 27 Sports. I believe the number 13 overall player if you use the On3 composite rankings. No matter where you look, this guy is already seen as one of the top prospects for the 2026 recruiting cycle there. And again, 6'3", 6'4", 220 pounds, can certainly do a lot of things. And, for Georgia, it's a guy moving forward that they really like, they feel really good about. You think back, Jacob Eason committed, prior to his junior year, 2 years out under Mike Bobo, when Mike Bobo was still the offensive coordinator here. So it's not exactly the most surprising thing in the world there. I think the big thing going forward, look, Georgia's got stability at the top when it comes to, head coach Kirby Smart, offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. Todd Hartley's entering his 5th year with the program moving forward. I think they know what they have going forward at the quarterback position. And so with that, they take the Curtis commitment. They don't have to answer any questions. And if anything, I think this allows them to really focus on getting the best possible player in the 2026 cycle, knowing that, hey, we've got Curtis already in the bag. Obviously, they're going to continue to recruit Curtis. Some say the recruitment doesn't start until a player commits out somewhere. So I think that is certainly something to watch going forward. Wally Smith, 100%. Georgia's still going to take a quarterback in 2025. Reality is they're at 3 scholarship quarterbacks right now. We know Georgia wants to get to 4. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if they're able to find someone in that spring transfer portal window to bring in and get them to 4 scholarship quarterbacks. And as we touch on, Carson Beck is going pro after this season. I would be like something, he would need to have an injury or something, and knock on wood there, to make sure that he is not. He's seen as a top draft pick for next season, top quarterback in college football coming back. So they're going to potentially be at 2 quarterbacks next year if they don't take anyone either via the transfer portal or via the recruiting cycle. And I think they're going to do both. I think they're going to they're trying to get someone with multiple years of eligibility left in this spring window, or potentially again in that December window, and then also sign a quarterback prospect for this class. The 3 big names that we've sort of known for a while now: Juju Lewis, he's taking an official visit to Georgia on May 31st. You have then Matt Zoller's blanking here. We've hit the 30-minute mark. I was just running 6 miles. Appreciate you guys being on here. Matt Zoller's, he's set to announce his commitment on April 4th, and then Ryan Montgomery will make his decision, or not make his decision. He's set to take an official visit to Georgia, I believe, June 21st there. So those are the sort of 3 big names there to know. But with that, my brain is clearly fried. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get Jeff Santel on here. He's busy, but he's got the story up online, DawgNation.com, the latest on Jared Curtis. We'll have a ton more on this moving forward and what it means. Bulldogs landing their first commitment in the 2026 cycle, and it's a good one. 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis. For Connor Riley and the entire DawgNation team here, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll have a ton more on this moving forward. But the big news today, Jared Curtis, 5-star quarterback for the 2026 cycle, commits to Georgia.